Al Jazeera podcasts.
Today, can the International Criminal Court survive?
Since US President Donald Trump imposed sanctions on its chief prosecutor Karim Khan in February, the Hague-based court has reportedly struggled to operate.
Now facing sanctions and scandal, the court's limited power is diminishing. So what does that mean for justice beyond borders? I'm Natasha DelToro, and this is The Take. Employees are barred from working in the United States. Email is difficult. Even speaking to a colleague or responding to your boss could mean up to 20 years in jail. That's life these days at the International Criminal Court, the only court that investigates and, where warranted, tries individuals for war crimes and crimes against humanity.
The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin because of his alleged involvement in abductions of children from Ukraine.
Breaking news, and the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants for Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant for alleged war crimes in the Gaza Strip. It's also issued warrants for Hamas leader Mohammed Diab al-Masri.
Well, the former Philippines President Rodrigo Duterte has been arrested at Manila Airport on an International Criminal Court warrant.
But today, it's finding it very difficult to do its job. Joining us to talk about this is Molly Quell, a reporter for the Associated Press who's been covering the International Criminal Court, the ICC, through its successes and the challenges that it's facing now.
My name is Molly Quell. I'm a journalist for the Associated Press, and I am coming to you from The Hague in the Netherlands.
I'm so excited to talk with you today. This is such an important topic, and I imagine there's a lot of tension there right now in your workplace. I know that you've been covering the ins and outs of the ICC for a few years now, and you've seen the court file some really high-profile indictments and hand out arrest warrants. But from what I'm reading right now, and from what you're reporting, it's not really functioning. Maybe you could tell us what's going on.
I think when I had this story that was published last week, it was somewhat funny because I didn't really expect it to have the sort of impact that it did. And this is because Trump had sanctioned the previous prosecutor, Fatou Bensouda, who's a lawyer from the Gambia. And those of us who kind of cover The Hague and cover the court sort of knew what the implication of Trump sanctioning Karim Khan in February were going to be.
That's ICC prosecutor Karim Khan.
That he was going to lose access to financial institutions, that he was going to lose access to services that are provided by U.S. companies, and that it was going to make life at the court very difficult, particularly for American citizens who are especially susceptible to the secondary effects of sanctions. And that's kind of exactly what has happened, that Microsoft has sort of canceled Khan's email address and his bank accounts have been frozen. And for a long period of time, these people were really sort of at risk of, fairly high criminal and financial penalties if they violated these sanctions orders. And so inevitably, what has happened is that a number of staff have left, also out of fear of being sanctioned themselves.
I mean, that's huge that Microsoft has cut the stuff to email. I mean, that must be sort of paralyzing the functions at the ICC.
I mean, it is the ICC is a user of a number of Microsoft products, but Microsoft is a U.S. corporation, and if they did not comply with the orders from the Trump administration, they faced serious, substantial penalties for continuing to provide a service to Karim Khan.
So what's the mood there like right now?
I mean, I don't think it's very good. I think it's been like this for a while. People have been sort of aware that another 4 years of a Trump administration was going to be quite bad for the ICC.
It's had huge implications obviously for the court, for Karim Khan, and for employees that are working there who risk jail time if they communicate with him. From
20
what
years,
I understand,
20 years in jail. I mean, 20 years in federal prison, right? If you violate the sanctions orders, and penalties of, I think, is $100,000 per instance. So that's wild. I don't have $100,000 to pay, so I'm sure most people don't.
So this guy's like, nobody's going to talk to him right now. He is like a pariah at the moment, I would imagine, just because people are afraid of what could happen to them.
Yeah. I mean, U.S. citizens in particular, sanctions need like kind of a sort of U.S. connection in order to kind of have these implications of these like secondary sanctions. And also, sanctions can be, they can be very opaque. And it can be very difficult to combat them. The people who are sanctioned are non-U.S. citizens, and that means they often don't have a right to kind of contest those sanctions in a U.S. court. So it can be quite hard to suss out exactly where the rules are for things.
So people would rather just not take the chance, is what I'm guessing. And
essentially, you end up with this problem of overcompliance. I mean, if you're a small NGO that works with the court, you don't have the money to kind of fight these things off. So instead, you choose to cease doing work with the ICC, or you choose to cease doing work on the Palestine investigation because you think that that's going to make you a target. So the sanctions are bad, right? But they are against Khan. But you can also sanction an institution. And so if Trump chooses to sanction the court as a whole, it is wildly unclear what happens to the detention center, because that would mean the court also loses access to all of its, anything that's provided by a U.S. service provider. So that would be no email for anybody that works at the court. The whole thing would go, right? But this would also be things like if the key cards system is an American company, they would also lose access to this. The ICC, it is the one that facilitates, right, like lawyers' visits to the detention facilities and all this kinds of stuff. And so, it's totally unclear what would happen if Trump sanctions the court with these guys who are sitting in detention.
And you also mentioned that this isn't the first time that Trump has gone after the court, that he was going after the court in his first term, but now in his second term, he's sort of come back with a vengeance. What are his reasons for going after Karim Khan? Is there any validity there?
What Trump says in his executive order is that the investigation into Palestine has led to arrest warrants for Netanyahu and other Israeli officials. Israel is an ally of the United States, and therefore the United States is going to defend its ally. Neither Israel nor the United States are members of the court, and the legal arguments sort of become this thing where they say, the court does not have jurisdiction over Netanyahu and over these other people. There are some separate legal arguments because the concept of Palestinian statehood is somewhat legally contested. And so that has also been an issue. The sort of serious legal argument is that the court has overstepped its reach here, and this generates a national security risk for the United States.
And let's talk about timing of this sanctions order. I mean, this sanctions order from Trump, it came after a visit to the White House by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who was basically being accused of war crimes, right? Yeah. The crime of starvation of civilians as a method of warfare. Yeah. Maybe you could talk to me a little bit about the timing of all this.
Yeah. So actually, we were kind of prepared for Trump to actually announce the sanctions on the day that he was inaugurated. But in fact, he did it while there was a visit from Netanyahu to Washington, D.C. And, I think that obviously Netanyahu does not want to be the subject to an arrest warrant. The prosecutor's office could request further arrest warrants for other Israeli officials. And so I think Israel kind of sees this entire investigation as a threat to, any number of sort of political leads or members of the military.
And from what I understand, there are thousands of protesters at The Hague, people who are outside of The Hague protesting in the streets against the war in Gaza. I mean, is that what's happening?
I mean, I am very tired, in part because also I was working over the weekend because the Netherlands saw the largest protest in 20 years on Sunday, when over 100,000 people turned out to kind of protest, more specifically, the Dutch government's response to the war in Gaza. I mean, when I was covering the case at another judicial institution in The Hague, the International Court of Justice, which is the UN's high court, last year, January. This is when this genocide case was brought by South Africa against Israel. I mean, there was, the protests outside were tremendous. Actually, we are a year to the day when we record this from when Khan announced that he was requesting arrest warrants. So
more with Molly after the break. So, Molly, you have Khan issuing the arrest warrants, which was, caused a stir. Then you have Trump ordering sanctions against Khan. But there's also something going on in Khan's life that we need to discuss.
Yeah.
So, Molly, you broke a story in the fall that was about how Karim Khan was also accused of sexual misconduct.
Yes.
And this was in the weeks before he issued the arrest warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu and Yoav Gallant. And then last week, he stepped down temporarily.
Yeah.
Let's talk about all this. And how is that impacting the court?
I wrote this story in the fall last year that Khan had been accused of sexual misconduct with a female aide, that he had tried for a year to sort of pursue her sexually and romantically. Other news outlets have since broken other stories on the topic. And essentially what had happened was that there was two sort of colleagues of this woman who were aware of what was going on and had filed a complaint. And the victim did not want to participate in that procedure. And so this was kind of an open and shut investigation. So that happened at the very beginning of May. And then 3 weeks later, Khan requested these warrants for Netanyahu and Gallant, as well as 3 Hamas leaders who have subsequently been killed in the conflict. And so kind of in the background of all of this sort of sexual misconduct allegation scandal has been playing out, which sort of came to a head last week when Khan stepped aside. And ultimately, the court's oversight body brought in an external investigative unit from the United Nations who has been conducting an investigation.
And so how does it impact then what's going on, the fact that he has stepped down? Is that a good thing, a bad thing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a little unclear. This just happened on Friday. So, I mean, I think kind of the sort of full ramifications of this are not quite being felt yet. There are 2 deputy prosecutors. They have taken over. They put out a statement on Monday saying that they plan to continue the mission of the office uninterrupted. And so I think that we will sort of see how things go from here.
I mean, the timing of all of this is unfortunate.
Unfortunate is a word, yeah.
Unfortunate. And I mean, and you talked about this, but a lot of the Israeli press, for example, is writing about Khan using the Netanyahu arrest warrant to divert attention from his sexual abuse allegations. What do we know about that? I mean, do you think that's accurate?
I mean, I'm not, I'm not in Khan's head, so I can't speak exactly to his motivation. But I think it's important to remember that the ICC is not Karim Khan, is not any chief prosecutor. This is an institution with 900 employees, many of whom are very, very dedicated to the pursuit of international justice. They believe very strongly in the mission of this court. And, there was an entire team of people behind the Palestine investigation and an entire team of people who put together the request for these arrest warrants. And those, the evidence that they brought forward to this panel of judges was sufficient to convince, 3 independent judges that they should issue these arrest warrants.
And it is, important, again, these judges said there was sufficient evidence. They found there were statements that were made by Yoav Gallant after October 7th that indicated that they had intentions on preventing humanitarian aid from coming into Gaza. It is a war crime to do that.
I mean, you cannot starve people as a method of warfare. This is very clearly, starvation as a weapon of war is very clearly illegal under the Rome Statute. And you can't extract retaliatory measures on civilians for, dangers on the battlefield.
Right. Let's back up a little bit because, people hear of the ICC, but they might not know that much about the history, how it came together, what its mission was of forming a global tribunal. So maybe you could fill in a little bit of that background.
Yeah, the ICC was created in 2002 by the Rome Statute, which was signed by somewhere, I think, a little over 100 countries at the time. And essentially, in the fallout from the Second World War, there was sort of this understanding that some crimes are so atrocious that, we as humanity cannot allow them to happen and have to take a stand against them. And this was also, for example, when the Genocide Convention was signed. And, there was a lot of allegations after the Second World War that this was kind of victor's justice. And so there was a push to kind of have an independent judicial tribunal that couldn't be accused of the same thing. And so, the argument was sort of what we should have is a single institution that exists permanently that can try, these very, very serious crimes when domestic jurisdictions are unable or unwilling to prosecute the people who commit them. And therefore now we have the ICC, which has investigations, I think, open in about a dozen situations around the world. I mean, we have been talking a lot about the conflict in Gaza, but there's also an investigation and outstanding warrants in Ukraine, in the Philippines, in a number of other places.
And so this is an organization that was formed to deter would-be war criminals, right? But at the same time, it's received a lot of criticism for maybe not being as effective, being slow.
I think that is an argument that goes around a lot about, sort of where the responsibility lies for kind of the failings of the court. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, right, it's the countries who signed up to the Rome Statute who are obliged to uphold the ideals of that treaty.
And just curious, Molly, have other U.S. presidents gone after the ICC the way that Trump has?
No. I mean, the U.S. has not always had a friendly relationship with the courts. I mean, you can see the difference sort of in Biden's statements, welcoming the arrest warrants for Putin and condemning the arrest warrants for Netanyahu. I mean, this is not merely a Trump thing, but no previous president has sanctioned a prosecutor or been so sort of actively hostile towards the court and its workings.
Yeah, kind of makes you wonder why he has this sort of beef with the ICC, and it is taking it's having a very negative effect on the workings of the court. Do you think there's a way out here?
The last round of sanctions were put in place by Trump and then undone by President Biden. So I think a lot of people are sort of looking forward, 3.5 years into the future, and anticipating that another U.S. president may undo what Trump has done. Beyond that, pressure on the Trump administration, I guess, to sort of undo this, and kind of the rest of the states parties, the states parties to the Rome Statute sort of working together to kind of fight back against this. There has been some movements in the European Union, for example, to institute what they call blocking legislation to try to prevent some of the worst effects of the sanctions. But at the end of the day, the U.S. is an extraordinarily large and powerful country, and it's very difficult to fight back against something that like sanctions when it's backed by a country like the United States.
Mm-hmm. And so, I guess what's left of the ICC now? I mean, would you say that it's on its last legs? I don't know if that's too dramatic, but what's left there, and what does that mean for justice worldwide?
I mean, as I was reporting the sanction story, kind of as we were going to press, there was a prosecutor at the court who won essentially an injunction against the Trump administration over the sanctions. Basically, what he was given was the Treasury Department can sort of issue this thing, that's kind of like a permission slip that allows U.S. citizens to interact with sanctioned individuals without fearing for the sort of ramifications of this. This is to allow, like lawyers and stuff to sort of be able to represent clients and that sort of thing. So I think there's some optimism that other U.S. citizens who work at the court will be able to get kind of a similar license, and that will free them up to be able to do their work in a more effective way. Khan has now taken leave, so to some degree, I suspect that alleviates some of the concerns about sanctions, although it creates other problems, of course, because now this is a prosecutor's office without its leader. So, I mean, I think that some investigations have moved forward. The court did arrest Duterte, earlier this year in March. So it's not as though, nothing is happening. I think the people who work there are very dedicated to the idea of justice, and that they really want to see kind of the worst of the worst brought to justice, and to bring justice to the victims of the people who have experienced kind of these really, really terrible crimes. So when I talk to people who work there, they're not giving up. And maybe if that doesn't mean working with inside the parameters at the ICC of like looking for other avenues where they can bring justice.
I want to go back to this image of like thousands of people protesting in the streets over what's happening in Gaza. And they're demanding justice, they're demanding accountability. And the Hague, ICC is unable to do much about it right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think people find that very frustrating. The wheels of international justice have always ground very slowly. It's very difficult to conduct a trial and an investigation in an active war zone where you do not have access, which is the case right now with Gaza. And so I think it's, very hard for people who have been victimized to wait for an opportunity to get justice.
Well, we will be following your reporting as we watch what unfolds at the ICC. Molly, thank you so much for coming on The Take.
Thank you. This has been a pleasure.
And that's The Take. We'd love to hear your thoughts and questions about today's episode. We've got our eye on the news around the globe. So what's new where you live? Let us know, and let's keep the conversation going. See you tomorrow.